Quiet on the set, please.
Camera speed.
Sound production, take one.
And action!
Welcome to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign. If you love old movies, Hollywood history, or the golden age of filmmaking, you've come to the right place. This is the podcast that talks about amazing stories of Tinseltown from another era. Hear fascinating conversations with writer-producer Steve Cubine, who quite literally lives just beneath the Hollywood sign, and actress-writer Nan McNamara. Now your hosts, Steve and Nan.
Welcome, everyone, to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign podcast. Steve, you remember last year we got an opportunity to go on the Warner Brothers lot.
Yes.
And experience the TCM tour of Warner Brothers.
Yeah, which they were just launching last year. Now it's been a full year of operation.
Yeah, and it's a really wonderful tour. If you're out here in Los Angeles, we highly recommend you check it out. But in today's episode, we're actually going to put the spotlight on the incredible journey of the Warner Brothers and the history of the studio. Harry?
Yeah, and it's such a story, too. And this story was actually recommended by a good friend of mine, Bill Murphy from Atlanta, Georgia. Bill wanted to learn about the Warner Brothers, so Bill, your wish is our command.
It really is. Harry, Albert, Sam, and Jack, four ambitious siblings who rose from really pretty modest immigrant roots to create one of the most influential movie studios in the world, Warner Brothers Studios. Their story begins in the early 20th century with a hand-cranked projector and a traveling film show, and it evolves into this groundbreaking entertainment empire that would really change the film industry forever. From their early struggles during the silent film era to their game-changing release of The Jazz Singer in 1927, which is the first feature-length talkie, the Warner Brothers didn't just adapt to change, they drove it. So I'm looking forward to tracing the rise of Warner Brothers, a studio born from risk, vision, and relentless belief in the power of storytelling.
I think to really understand the Warner Brothers, you have to look at their father,
Benjamin Wansel.
He was, of course, the family patriarch, and he and his wife, Pearl, they were both born in a small Polish village in 1857. He was a cobbler by trade. He received no formal education due to the Russians who ruled Poland at the time. They were denying Jewish people access to education. So any education he got was self-taught. Now, Benjamin and Pearl, they had their first son, Harry, in 1879, followed by a daughter, Anna, in 1881. So as things heated up in Poland politically and the Jewish people became more repressed, Benjamin and Pearl made the very difficult but brave decision to uproot the entire family and move to America to seek freedom and a better life for themselves. Well, the family settled in Baltimore, and Benjamin opened a small shoe repair shop where he came up with sort of a novel idea of repairing customers' shoes while they waited.
Which we have nowadays.
We still do.
Yeah.
Thank you, Benjamin.
A lot more children followed. Albert was born in 1884, followed closely by Henry, Samuel, Rose, and Fanny. Unfortunately, Henry and Fanny died when they were toddlers. The family struggled as Benjamin's business was slow to start, but the kids were soon helping out with odd jobs to make ends meet. Around this time, the family changed their last name to Warner.
Eventually, Benjamin started selling pots and pans door to door to help supplement the income of the family, but that didn't bring in a lot of money, so he moved the entire family to northern Canada, where he got involved with a fur trading business. And now, during this stay in Canada, two more children came along, Jack in 1892 and David in 1893. However, a crooked business partner stole Benjamin's fur pelts and left him penniless. So the family hightailed it back to Baltimore and they started up the shoe repair shop again. But by now, Harry, who was 15, and Albert, who was 12, they were actually helping out in the shop to kind of help the family.
Right. The business improved and Benjamin moved the family again to Youngstown, Ohio, where Benjamin and the boys opened a new shop. He tried to expand the business by adding groceries to his shop, but he couldn't compete with the larger grocery stores. So rather than give up groceries, he moved to a larger space in a more desirable neighborhood, expanding the grocery element and closing down the shoe repair side. Around this time, two more children were born, a daughter, Sadie, in 1895, and a son, Milton, in 1886.
At the grocery store, everybody had a role. Jack was in charge of deliveries. However, Jack really wanted to be a performer. He would sing for anybody who would listen. He was sort of like a boy soprano. He was also a whiz at sight reading writing music, and he soon began performing all around Youngstown. And he also incorporated dialects and humor and kind of came up with these acts that he would perform. Meanwhile, Albert moved to Chicago, where he worked as a soap salesman, but not a lot of success there. And Harry, who had developed a keen sense of business, he stayed home and helped the father run the shop.
Sam Warner, on the other hand, followed in Jack's footsteps and sought a career in entertainment. I find this fascinating.
I know.
He became a carnival barker at an egg-tossing booth.
Was there a big need for an egg tossing booth?
I have no idea. He then worked as an assistant to the carnival's snake charmer.
Oh, he moved up.
Yes. Maybe that was a skill set that would come in handy later with his brother Jack, right?
Oh, totally.
However, his snake charming days were cut short when the python tried to strangle his boss and the exhibit was closed.
I hate when that happens.
Yeah. Sam wandered from career to career, from ice cream cone salesman to fireman, and he was really restless and unsatisfied. But he finally thought he'd found his golden ticket when a friend taught him how to operate what was called an Edison kinetoscope, which was an early projector.
So then Sam hurried back to Youngstown, and he convinced the entire family, who were all now living there, he convinced them that motion pictures was where their future was. So in 1903, he even convinced his dad to sell a valuable watch and chain and the family horse in order to buy a Model B projector for $1,000. Well, along with his projector came a print of the Edwin S. Porter short Western film, The Great Train Robbery, which ran about 10 minutes. So they rented out space in an empty store, they set up the projector, and the whole family got involved. Rose accompanied on piano, Sam operated the projector, Albert and Harry ran the box office, and naturally, Jack sang songs during the show. Well, the business really began to take off, and soon they took the show on the road, and they were engaged in this tour of Pennsylvania and Ohio.
Well, with Harry's deft business skills, the family soon realized that the real money in motion pictures was not in displaying them, not in just showing them, but in distributing them to other theaters. So in 1907, they sold the family's shop and opened their own Nickelodeon called the Cascade Theater in Newcastle, Pennsylvania. It had 99 seats, one seat short of the number that would have subjected them to stricter fire regulations. So since funds were tight, they had to borrow folding chairs from a mortuary, always worried that one of their shows would be stopped by a well-attended funeral.
That's very funny. Jack, soon he joined the brothers back in Pennsylvania, and they were opening more Nickelodeons in Atlanta and Norfolk, Virginia. They hit the burgeoning industry at just the right time, and motion pictures began to take off, and the Warner brothers were finally making some money. Well, they needed to buy more films to keep the audience engaged and also to make more money. So Harry came up with a method of grouping theater owners so that prints could be distributed to several outlets. Now, this idea marked the beginning of what we would now consider distribution, and this led the brothers to create the Duquesne Amusement Supply Company.
So their business is going pretty well, but it takes a hit when Thomas Edison, one of the pioneers of motion pictures, becomes upset that he's not profiting from all these other companies using his invention to distribute and display movies.
Oh, greedy Thomas.
And so he's able to convince the major makers of films like Vitagraph, Selig, Biography, and others to band together and form the Motion Picture Patents Company, which was collectively called the Trust. Now, this prevented independent filmmakers from making films without purchasing a license and making it tough for other film exchanges like the Warners to distribute films. So the Trust began charging $2 a week for the use of the projector. And to further run the mom and pop distributors out of business, they also formed what was called the General Film Company, whose sole purpose was to buy out all the mom and pops and liquidate them. They even hired thugs to enforce the fees of the Trust. It was dirty and it was mob-like.
Wow.
The Warner family caved in, and who could blame them?
Yeah.
Selling their exchange to the General Film Company and then moving back to Youngstown distraught.
Yeah, but Sam Warner, he was kind of undaunted by this whole thing. So he went to New York, and he came back to Youngstown having purchased the rights to this 5-reeler film called Dante's Inferno from 1911, which I think was an Italian silent film that, of course, was based on the Divine Comedy.
Right.
His idea was to take the film on the road, which had proved very lucrative for the brothers before. So from their first tour, they made about $1,500 $1,900, but Sam and Jack lost the profits in a craps game.
Oh, no.
But they knew they were onto something, so Harry, Albert, Sam, and Jack decided to make films of their own.
They found an abandoned warehouse in St. Louis, and they moved there and set up shop. They managed to scrape together enough cash to move into film production. So for the next few years, they were kept afloat by producing cliffhanger serials and a very famous film made for the U.S. Army, warning World War I soldiers about the dangers of venereal disease.
Just doing their part.
Yep, just doing their part. Very important. Yep. Their first narrative film was a Western short called Peril on the Plains, 1912, which Sam actually directed. Their second film was the short film Raiders on the Mexican Border, also in 1912.
Now, meanwhile, Carl Laemmle, who we all know would go on to establish Universal Studios, he was working to sort of undermine this trust, and he formed the Independent Picture Company for distribution through his own and other independent film exchanges. So the Warner Brothers were very happy to join forces with Laemmle, and this set them back up in the film exchange business. Only this time, they decided to run their operation in Los Angeles, where the weather was more agreeable for filmmaking. So the brothers formed the Warner Features Company and began making and distributing films again.
Well, we're learning here. They're determined not to give up, right? So they soldier through. In 1918, they produced their first full-length feature film called My 4 Years in Germany, a World War I drama that gained widespread attention and financial success. The film demonstrated the brothers' ability to this time produce timely and popular content, setting the stage for future growth. And we'll see that as we learn what kinds of films they produce later. Sam Warner, in particular, showed a keen interest in the technical aspects of filmmaking, which would later play a key role in Warner Brothers' pioneering work in sound films.
So on April the 4th, 1923, Warner Brothers Pictures, Inc. was formally incorporated. So the company's early operations were based, of course, in Hollywood, California, where Harry Warner managed the studio's business affairs from New York. The studio initially struggled to compete with larger, more established rivals. However, the brothers were determined to differentiate themselves by innovating in ways that others had not yet really embraced.
In 1923, the brothers were successful enough to attract director Ernst Lubitsch, writer-producer Darryl F. Zanuck, who was not Darryl F. Zanuck at the time, right?
Before Fox.
Yeah, and actor John Barrymore. But it was actually a furry little friend named Rin Tin Tin who kept the lights on at Sunset and Bronson, where they were housed. Jack Warner actually called Rin Tin Tin the mortgage lifter, which I love.
That's fantastic. Their next big gamble came in 1925 when they purchased Vitagraph Studios. Now, this purchase gave them 2 new studios, and it also gave them access to Vitagraph's vast film library and distribution possibilities, not only in North America, but also in Europe.
On March 3rd, 1925, something very important happened. Warner Brothers launched KFWB, its first radio station in Los Angeles. And this launch would go on to change, ultimately, film forever.
Absolutely.
So before we get into that, let's give this week's Hollywood Pop Quiz.
Well, our pop quiz question, it's going to be just very simple. According to Box Office Mojo, what is the highest grossing Warner Brothers movie of all time?
Oh, I love this question.
This will be a good one.
All right, we'll be right back with the answer and more about the history of Warner Brothers after this.
Steve and Ann will be right back, but first another stop on the Hollywood tour. Speaking of very old Hollywood history, you may have heard the story about Flagstaff, Arizona, almost becoming the headquarters for movie making instead of Hollywood. Legend says Cecil B. DeMille had taken a train from New York to Flagstaff to find a spot to shoot The Squaw Man. That movie came out in 1914. The story goes, when he pulled into the station in northern Arizona, he was quoted as saying, "When we got off the train in Flagstaff, it was colder than when I left New York." He went on to say, "We looked around and said, this doesn't look like the type of country the Squaw Man was laid in. So we got back on the train and came out to California." Now that film, of course, would declare itself the first full-length feature film shot in Los Angeles. But get this, regardless of the location, DeMille's older brother William thought Cecil was crazy to be interested in movie making at all. He wrote his younger brother with these encouraging words, quote, "When you get stranded out there in the West, I will send you your railroad fare home as usual." But he wasn't done. He signed off saying, "I can't understand how you're willing struggling to identify yourself with this cheap form of amusement which no one will ever allude to as art. In fact, in 1911, the Moving Picture World Trade magazine boasted that 320 days a year of ideal motion picture photography weather could be found in Los Angeles. And to this day, Flagstaff, Arizona still gets more than 3 feet of snow every winter. That's about 30% more snow than Minneapolis, St. Paul. Aren't we all glad Mr. DeMille stayed on that train? And now back to Steve and Ann from Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
Welcome back, everybody. Before we get further into the Warner Brothers and their vast history, we're going to give a shout out to our Listener of the Week. And this week, we honor Lisa Thaler. Now, Lisa is a longtime producer at CNBC, and she also has been a listener since day one. She's a huge fan of Broadway shows and classic films, and as Lindsay says, she is hands down the single best producer he has ever worked with.
Yeah, baby.
And a wonderful human being on top of that.
So thank you, Lisa. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lisa. Well, we left off with Warner Brothers launching a radio station called KFWB. 3 of the 4 Warner Brothers thought it should be as a function to promote their films, right? But Sam Warner, he somehow had this vision. He saw the radio station as the first step in ushering in an era of talking motion pictures. Sam had had a lifelong fascination with machines and technology and worked closely with an engineer setting up KFWB's studios. That same engineer later showed him a process he was working on to synchronize sound to moving pictures. The other 3 brothers were finally convinced of the merits of the new system, which they purchased and renamed Vitaphone to capitalize on their recent acquisition of Vitagraph Pictures.
Very clever.
Yeah.
The next year, the Warner Brothers produced Don Juan, which starred John Barrymore. This was their first full-length feature employing this new Vitaphone process for music and sound effects. So Sam oversaw the recording of an orchestra for the film at the Metropolitan Opera House in New York, a location that was a little bit problematic due to the subway lines that ran directly beneath the theater. Little trouble for sound. But the film premiered in New York City on August the 6th, 1926. All 1,200 seats of the Warner's Theater in Manhattan were sold out at a whopping price of $11 a ticket.
Wow.
Which was an expensive ticket, but even with the success, the film was unable to recoup its costs, and the brothers were in serious debt.
But now we're about to get into one of the most pivotal moments in Warner Brothers history and in the history of cinema, as we alluded to earlier. It came with the release of The Jazz Singer in 1927. The film, starring Al Jolson, it wasn't the first to incorporate synchronized sound, but it was the first feature-length motion picture to include synchronized dialogue sequences. This was made possible by the Warner Brothers Vitaphone system.
Now, Sam Warner, who had really been the driving force behind incorporating sound into movies, tragically, he died from a cerebral hemorrhage the day before The Jazz Singer opened.
How awful.
I know. He never really got to enjoy the fruits of his labor, which is such a shame. And despite his passing, though, the success of the film really catapulted Warner Brothers into the forefront of the movie industry and marked the beginning of the talkie era. And the company's gamble on sound really paid off, and the Warner Brothers quickly transitioned its productions to include synchronized sound on all their motion pictures.
So following the success of The Jazz Singer, Warner Brothers rapidly expanded. They acquired a controlling interest in what was called First National Pictures, which gave them access to a larger studio lot in beautiful downtown Burbank,
Beautiful Burbank,
California, where Warner Brothers Studios remains headquartered today.
Now, things seem to be going well, but in October of 1929, as we all know, the stock market crashed, which was followed by the Great Depression. So the Warner Brothers really had to get creative about how to keep the lights on at Warner Brothers. By the end of 1932, they posted a loss of over $14 million. They really feared that things were going to fall apart, but, you know, they're very tenacious boys, so what did they do?
Well, to keep the company afloat, they were really smart about the films that they made. They soon became famous for a variety of film genres. Number one, I think of Warner Brothers, I think of gangster films. Like Little Caesar, 1931, The Public Enemy, 1931, Scarface, 1932, and Angels with Dirty Faces in 1938, making stars out of all these fabulous tough guys.
What a lot.
Like Edward G. Robinson, Humphrey Bogart, George Raft, and James Cagney.
The studio also offered well-crafted women's pictures, which offers a new kind of leading lady, a tougher, a more cynical woman who really didn't wait around to be saved by the hero.
Yeah, baby.
You know, films like Babyface, 1933, Female, also 1933, Marked Woman, and even Jezebel with Bette Davis, 1938. This brought actresses like Barbara Stanwyck and, of course, Bette Davis, Ruth Chattering, Ann Sheridan, and even Ida Lupino to the forefront of popularity.
And then the studio also became known for its Busby Berkeley musicals and its adventure films like Captain Blood, 1935, also The Seahawk, 1940, Charge of the Light Brigade, 1936, and of course, The Adventures of Robin Hood in 1938. So again, these stars that come out of that genre, Errol Flynn, Olivia de Havilland, Basil Rathbone, and Claude Rains, all rose to prominence in these action-filled adventure films.
They were so smart to create
Yes.
different types of genres that you
Yes.
appeal to a mass audience.
Right.
The studio also launched a highly successful animation division known as Warner Brothers Cartoons, producing beloved characters like Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck and Porky Pig and my favorite Elmer Fudd under the Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies banner.
Which we actually got to see the structure that all started at
Yes.
Termite Terrace on the Warner Brothers lot. It's still there.
I know. I guess there were lots of termites.
Now, at the close of 1934, another tragedy strikes. A fire engulfed the Burbank studio, destroying 20 years worth of irreplaceable Warner Brothers, First National, and Vitagraph films.
Oh, wow.
That is just heartbreaking.
tragic.
Around the same time, their parents, Benjamin and Pearl Warner, both passed away. Now, Jack and Harry had never been very close, but their parents' death created even a greater rift that eventually grew into an irreparable break between the brothers.
Warner Brothers was finally able to scrape together a modest profit by 1935. You know, several of their films during these years were very well received, both commercially and critically, including the 1937 film The Life of Emile Zola, which won the studio's very first Academy Award for Best Picture. They'd already received one special Academy Award in 1929 for their use of synchronized sound in The Jazz Singer and their work with the Vitaphone system, which was a non-competitive Oscar. So this was their first competitive win.
Right. Now, by the close of the decade, with the war looming in Europe, the brothers produced a film called Confessions of a Nazi Spy, 1939, to alert the country to the dangers of Nazism, and they had certainly grown up with, the forefront of that. It got the attention of Congress, which called Harry to Washington to address charges of creating hysteria. Can you imagine that?
Wow.
So within months of the film's release, Hitler invaded Poland and World War II began.
In the 1940s, Warner Brothers emerged as one of Hollywood's most powerful and successful studios, producing a string of critically acclaimed and commercially successful films that really defined the decade. The studio became known for its sharp, socially aware storytelling, its mastery of film noir, and wartime drama. Also became known for its stable of top-tier stars, which included Humphrey Bogart and Bette Davis, James Cagney, Joan Crawford. The list goes on and on and on. Blockbusters like The Maltese Falcon from 1941, Now Voyager 1942, and The Big Sleep 1946 showcased the studio's ability to blend emotional depth with popular appeal. While film noir classics such as High Sierra 1941, The Big Sleep 1946, and White Heat 1949 cemented its reputation for gritty, atmospheric storytelling.
Now, Warner Brothers also played a key role in the patriotic war effort through films by bolstering the American morale, such as You're in the Army Now, 1941, Yankee Doodle Dandy, 1942, again, Now Voyager, 1942, This is the Army, 1943, and of course, Casablanca, 1942. This decade really solidified the studio's identity as a producer of bold, intelligent, and influential cinema, leaving an enduring legacy in Hollywood history.
Now, the Warner Brothers were known for this common practice at the time of suspending actors who refused parts that were part of their contract, and they would then tack on the suspension time onto the end of their contracts, which effectively kept them bound far beyond the original terms of the contract. Well, in 1943, actress Olivia de Havilland challenged this, arguing that under California labor law, personal service contracts couldn't last more than 7 calendar years. She actually won her case in December of 1944 in a landmark decision, which is known as the de Havilland Law, which broke the studio's long-standing control over actors' careers.
What a brave thing that she did. Post-World War II, Warner Brothers had record profits. However, the studio employees, who had all sacrificed during the war, wanted a bigger share of those profits. The brothers refused, and the workers responded by rioting outside the gates and walking off the job for a month.
In 1947, they actually had some conflict with the government. The U.S. Justice Department found the major studios guilty of antitrust violations and forced them to sell their theater divisions. Well, this marked the end of a 40-year run, which dated back to the old Cascade Theater in Newcastle, Pennsylvania, during which the Warner Brothers had been involved in film exhibition.
The government also was taking issue with the studio's content, so Warner Brothers produced a film during World War II called Mission to Moscow, 1943. It was a favor to President Roosevelt. It was intended to encourage aid to Russia, which was then a World War II ally.
Yeah.
But by the late 1940s, Senator Joseph McCarthy had infected the country with his Red Scare, so Russia was now an enemy. Jack Warner was forced to appear before the House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC, to testify about communism in Hollywood. Jack Warner named names, including several Warner Brothers employees.
What a guy.
What a guy.
Yeah. By the dawn of the 1950s, all of the major studios faced their biggest threat to date from this new thing called television.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Hollywood feared it would keep people in their living rooms instead of out in theaters. Most producers ignored the potential for this new medium, but Warner Brothers chose to invest in television. However, the government stopped this, fearing a new form of a media monopoly.
So in retaliation, Warner Brothers and other major studios refused to show their films on television, which,
Interesting.
Yeah.
You're not going to play with us. We're not going to play with you.
Exactly. Warner Brothers did experiment with 3D and CinemaScope to lure audiences back to the theater, because you can't watch that in this little tiny box, giving audiences better visuals.
Yeah.
Additionally, Warner features were almost all released in color, and at that point, televisions were not in color.
Yeah. By 1955, the writing was definitely on the wall, and Warner Brothers decided to try out TV with a program called Warner Brothers Presents. Well, eventually, the studio embraced this new medium, and they launched several programs in the 50s, mostly westerns like Cheyenne and Maverick and Bronco and Colt 45.
And they had a comeback with musicals in the 1950s, making Doris Day the studio's biggest star. The studio also found ways to stand out as an edgier medium than television, with films like A Streetcar Named Desire, 1951, starring Marlon Brando as Stanley Kowalski, and 3 films that made James Dean a movie star. East of Eden, 1955, Rebel Without a Cause, 1955, and Giant in 1956. Of course, Dean tragically died in a car crash in late 1955.
By the time the mid-50s rolled around, the competition from television, plus the decline of the studio system, the antitrust rulings that forced studios to divest their theater chains, caused all kinds of problems for Warner Brothers. Jack and Harry, the two brothers most dissimilar in age and temperament, they were constantly fighting. Well, legend has it that at one point, at the peak of their animosity, an angry Harry actually chased Jack around the studio lot with a lead pipe.
That is just wild.
Around this time, the brothers, they were aging, they were tired, they were weary. They began to consider selling the studio.
All right, so this is quite a story. In 1956, they agree. The Warner Brothers agree to sell their shares in Warner Brother Pictures. The deal was supposed to be this coordinated exit for the family, allowing them to profit and also step away from the business. So they sold their shares to a group of investors led by a banker, Serge Semenenko, who was working at an investment firm called Webb and Knapp. The buyers were not aware that Jack Warner, that little Jack.
Oh, Jack.
He had a secret plan.
Oh, he did. Well, what Jack had done was secretly arrange with this investment group to buy back a controlling interest in the company after his brothers had sold their shares and had stepped away. So this allowed him to remain on as president of the studio, essentially making him the sole Warner still in charge of Warner Brothers, while Harry and Albert were completely out of the business.
And naturally, Harry and Albert are a little upset about this.
You think?
They felt deeply betrayed. Harry, in particular, never forgave Jack. He saw it as a personal and professional betrayal after decades of working together to build this company. I mean, blood, sweat, and tears.
So sad.
Harry died of a stroke, some say brought on by the betrayal a short time later, and Albert, who did live for another 11 years, never spoke to his brother Jack again.
So tragic. Jack didn't even attend his brother Harry's funeral, and he was later, 4 days later, involved in a near-fatal car crash. So maybe that was his karma. I don't know. But Jack Warner remained the head of Warner Brothers until 1967 when he finally sold the company to Seven Arts Productions. He stayed on briefly as an executive before finally stepping down.
He did continue to produce independently for a few more years until his death in 1978. But even after his passing, the family rift did not end. Jack was buried in the same cemetery as the rest of the Warner brothers and the Warners in general, their whole family, but not with them in the family mausoleum.
Wow. No room in the inn for you, Jack.
Yeah.
From its humble beginnings in 1916 as a very small family-run operation to becoming this global entertainment powerhouse, Warner Brothers has consistently played a central role in the evolution of film and television. Its willingness to embrace new technologies and storytelling methods, from sound pictures to television and later digital streaming, this has allowed it to remain so relevant throughout dramatic changes in the industry and in history.
And today, Warner Brothers Studios in Burbank still stands as a historic yet modern symbol of the company's legacy. It's home to film and television production, studio tours, as we talked about, countless cultural touchstones. Through mergers and acquisitions, including its recent identity under Warner Brothers Discovery, the studio continues to be a major force in shaping the future of entertainment.
And Warner Brothers is also ultimately in charge of TCM now.
Yes.
So we love that.
Yeah.
The history of the Warner Brothers, it's really a testament, I think, to innovation and resilience, to creative vision. And I have to say, if you really think about their history, it was Sam Warner. He was the visionary.
Yes, he was.
And it really kind of breaks my heart that when you talk about the Warner Brothers, everybody knows Harry, everybody knows
And
Jack.
Jack.
Nobody talks about
Yeah,
Sam.
yeah.
And I think Sam was so pivotal
Right.
in making this whole thing happen.
Right.
So from its foundation in the early 20th century through the groundbreaking work in sound and its enduring influence through classic movies and beloved characters, Warner Brothers has really left this indelible mark on global culture.
All right, I have a question for you after this wonderful history of Warner Brothers. Okay, two actually. Favorite decade of films at Warner Brothers and favorite male and female actors.
Oh, good questions. I've got to say the 40s. Any decade of any studio that gives you Casablanca and The Big Sleep and The Maltese Falcon and High Sierra and all these great movies,
Yes.
it has to be the 40s.
I agree.
What about
40s,
you?
40s it is. I mean, the films that we still look at today and watch and think of as top in their genre are from the 40s.
All from the 40s,
Yeah.
yeah. And for actors, for me, it's got to be Humphrey Bogart, hands down, with John Garfield a real close second.
Okay.
And then for women,
I know. It's tough.
it's tough, but Betty Davis pops into mind, and you can't say Warner Brothers and not say Betty Davis.
Yes.
But I'm going to go with Ida Lupino, the poor man's Betty Davis.
Okay. All right.
I just loved her. I think she had a little saucy grittiness to her that was kind of sexy. And,
Yes.
But she could do comedy. She could do drama. Ida Lupino.
I love the Betty. I do. But I'm also going to bring up the Joan.
Oh,
The Joan
yeah.
Crawford. In the 40s, we know she started at MGM, but
Yeah.
the work she did at Warner Brothers was pretty amazing. And the fact that MGM did not sign her again.
Yes.
And that, she kind of picked herself up and went,
Yeah.
I'm going to show you. I'm going to win an Oscar.
I was going to say, and Warner Brothers won her an Oscar where
Yes.
MGM failed to do so.
Yes,
So,
and I would say I would agree with you about Humphrey Bogart. I
Yeah.
know some people take issue with him as a great actor, but I think you really need to watch his body of work,
Yeah.
and you will see this man.
Go back and watch The Petrified Forest
Yeah.
and tell me that man's not a good actor.
I had an acting teacher once who said, just think the thoughts on film. And it's very hard to do that. And Humphrey Bogart does it.
He does.
And you see the story
Yeah.
in his eyes. So,
What a legacy this studio's left us.
yeah. Well, this has been so much fun. I would love to revisit that question, the Hollywood Pop Quiz.
All right, the pop quiz question, of course, was according to Box Office Mojo, what's the highest grossing Warner Brothers movie of all time? time.
All right. Well, I did ask you on the break, is it a modern movie? And you said yes.
Yes, very modern movie.
And we've all seen it. I asked you that question
We've
too.
all seen it. We all love it.
So
it's very pink.
Yes, we're going to go with Barbie.
It's Barbie. Believe it or not, Barbie so far has earned $1.44 billion worldwide.
Yay, Greta.
Yes.
Way to go, baby.
I'm just kidding.
That's our happy place. When we need a little pick-me-up, we always play. From the Oscars, we play that clip of Ryan Gosling
Wasn't that
sitting in the theater
brilliant?
and getting, oh my gosh. If you want to pick-me-up, people, look on YouTube and you will just smile and smile.
I love it. Thank you, Warner Brothers, for those smiles.
Well, thanks everyone for spending this time with us. We would love it if you would give us a 5-star review wherever you listen to the podcast. You can also watch the podcast on YouTube, and if you do that, please subscribe and give us a thumbs up. You can also follow us on social media. Our handle is @FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign. We are on Instagram and Facebook.
And we'd love to hear from you, so please keep those emails coming. You can email us at info@FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com.
That's this week's view.
From Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
You've been listening to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign with Steve Cubine and Ann McNamara, the podcast that celebrates amazing stories of Tinseltown from its golden era. Join us next week for another episode and learn something else about Hollywood you probably never knew. Take a moment and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review, and tell your friends about us too. It'll help grow the podcast. Visit Steve's website at FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com. The executive producers are Steve Cubine and Nan McNamara. Executive producer and post-production supervisor Lindsay Schnebley. Associate producer and researcher John Price Ritchie. This podcast is part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to their other fine shows like The Box of Oddities and The Shallow End with Schnebley and Toth. Copyright 2025. All rights reserved. That's a wrap.